In Elden Ring Network Test version, we finally have a chance to see From Software's game engine running for the first time ever natively on a new generation of console platforms, specifically the Xbox Series and the PlayStation 5. With this being the case, it is of course tempting to experience this early version of Elden Ring running at its best. However, given this chance, and knowing that the base model PlayStation 4 still remains today the most popular home console in the lead up to the full game's release, the question of how well we might expect Elden Ring to perform on this lower powered machine is one that needs to be addressed first. Specifically, I spent around 20 hours with Elden Ring Network Test version running on the oldest launch day model of the PlayStation 4 console, equipped with the originally installed 5400 RPM 500GB hard drive. Missing out on playing the game at its best so that you can see it at its worst was a sacrifice I was willing to make for the sake of research. So let's spend some time today just taking a look over how the game plays while running on this hardware configuration before we drill down on the specifics and talk about what exactly we're dealing with here. From both a visual and technical perspective, the opening moment where we first step out into Limgrave is absolutely stunning. The incredible use of seamless level of detail assets spanning vast distances is by no means a new paradigm at play here, but the combination of scale and density which is immediately on display is like nothing seen before in this game engine. From Software have been using Simplygon middleware since the original Dark Souls in order to render a perfect snapshot of the distant game world with minimal resource usage, meaning that PlayStation 4 players get to experience the massive open world without the need for fog or limited draw distances to keep the pace of performance.
Oh yes. Tarnished, are we? Come to the lands between for the Elden Ring,
The vast field ahead is littered with tightly packed areas set up for intimate encounters, as well as wandering mobs of enemies and creatures bearing various degrees of hostility, the majority of which can be seen going about their duties even from a great distance. Similarly, trees, foliage, and grass stretch out across the landscape without significant draw distance limitations to distract from the overall incredible scene. Whether taking place outside in the vast field or inside smaller camps, ruins, and dungeons, combat plays out with a wonderful fluidity regardless. Whether by slow-paced stealth or a full frontal assault requiring well-timed dodges and parries, performance holds steady, making it easy to enjoy regardless of the lower hardware specifications driving the experience here. Throughout my time playing, there was never a moment where I felt that I would have been better able to react to or cope with a challenge if I had have been playing on a more powerful system. There is absolutely a solid, enjoyable experience to be had by anyone for whom the PlayStation 4 is the most powerful console they currently own. The most direct comparison to make is of course to Sekiro, or even Dark Souls 3. Two previous titles that realistically set expectations going forward for anyone who played those already on the same hardware. My initial concerns had been that the much greater scope of Elden Ring would mean that the game engine we had already seen pushed to its limits on the PlayStation 4 would now finally buckle and break. However, time clearly spent on optimizations and some changes to the way the game engine balances between rendering individual distant creatures and large mobs of nearby enemies creates a well-functioning system devoid of any overt performance dips where it matters most. Exploring the open world of Elden Ring Network Test version is a fantastic experience. Making slow and steady progress clearing out enemies across such a huge expanse comes with a strangely addictive satisfaction. Regularly coming across a new encampment to be looted, meeting a new character hinting at a questline to be explored.
You? Yeah, you there. Stop pretending you can't see me.
Or discovering a signpost directing us to a dungeon, wherein I happened to find my personal favourite boss design of my time spent with the game. The moment-to-moment gameplay flows incredibly well. On that note, the number of bosses to be found in the network test version is far beyond what you're likely expecting when initially going in. Having expectations set by previous network tests in the series, there has almost always only been one boss to find throughout. This is a dramatically different situation. Going back to performance, of course the game is running here from the slowest possible storage device, the aforementioned 5400 RPM hard drive. Asset streaming is clearly no issue, high-speed traversal goes off without a hitch. So that mostly leaves the question of loading times. When dying and returning to a point nearby, loading is extremely fast, typically around 15 seconds. Many boss encounters will only send you a short distance away, so continuous retries don't feel like a chore. Out in the field, death is more likely to send you a little further away, and in these situations I did measure loading times closer to around 22 seconds. Still absolutely no problem at all considering the hardware at play. But of course we need to talk about frame rate. Elden Ring Network Test version is, of course, capped at 30 frames per second when running on base PlayStation 4 consoles. I'm sure that's obvious from the footage we've taken a look at so far. And I think, based on what you have seen so far, it's very likely I've already given you a good idea of whether or not you'll be able to enjoy the game at this level of performance. So hopefully with that decision already cemented in mind, let's take a look at the one glaring issue that has truly stood the test of time. Elden Ring Network Test version has a frame rate cap implemented in a way that synchronizes frame timing not to the vertical refresh of the display device, but instead to a 33 millisecond timer which resets every time a frame is displayed. This means that if a frame renders late, all subsequent frames will render off pace for a short time before resynchronizing a moment later. This is, of course, something commonly referred to as bad frame pacing. As you can see on the frame rate graph, the main line typically stays at the 30 FPS average, but from time to time it will wobble erratically as frames are suddenly being rendered out of step with the monitor's refresh rate. As was the case in Bloodborne, Dark Souls 3 and Sekiro before it, the same method of frame synchronization is implemented here. Thankfully, what this means is that if you were fine with those previous titles, you'll have a great time here. The overall average frame rate has no issue at all maintaining a steady 30 FPS, with drops only occurring during large full-screen effects, such as getting caught in a huge explosion. With regard to the aforementioned frame timing issues, I personally wasn't able to tell whether or not there'd been any change in how things were handled in comparison to previous titles. It wasn't until I went back and analysed this footage I was able to say for sure. In my case, I'm lucky for this not to be a problem for me. However, if you're sensitive to stutters, especially in camera movement, enough so to impact your experience with Bloodborne, Dark Souls 3 or Sekiro previously, then you'll likely find somewhat noticeable issue once again here. It's quite interesting to see such a strange engineering decision made so long ago in the development of this game engine persist still today. Still, the fact that the vast majority of Elden Ring Network Test version runs at a solid 30 FPS regardless is an incredible feat, and overall is a great experience on the older hardware. I don't want to focus too much on the actual numbers when it comes to performance, for one because there's not much more to be said on the matter, but also because at this point the only people who are going to play Elden Ring on a base model PlayStation 4 console are those for whom there's no other alternative. Knowing that the game is an absolutely playable, enjoyable experience is something I hope I've been able to at least somewhat reassure here today. I'd love to talk more about my experience with Elden Ring Network Test version from a more gameplay, mechanical, and scenario perspective, but I think I'll leave things at that for now. If you'd like to ask me anything about Elden Ring at this point, you can always catch me on Twitch every day via a link in the description. Now that this video is live, I'm free to talk about and answer any questions with regard to what I experienced in my time with Elden Ring Network Test version, so feel free to come along. You can find more ways to follow and support my work in the description, and either way, thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.